about costume heroes thwarting evil villains, mutated turtles who love pizza, a boy and a stuffed tiger at war with snowmen, or a talking duck that practices law. Yes, that's really a thing. They make us laugh, make us cry, and they can even inspire us. You can bag and board them, throw them in a stack, collect them in a trade, or read them in the Sunday paper. No matter what they are about, no matter what emotions they invoke, and no matter how you read them, there is no denying that comics have truly become one of America's greatest art forms. I'm your host, Steven Spivak, and today on DG Live, we're talking anything and everything comics. Joining me today are none other than Graham Zielinski. Graham, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And Mila Kawaja.
Hello.
Mila?
Thanks for having me.
All right, so to start off today's show, let's get a history of where you guys got started with comics. Mila, let's start with you.
Well, I've been into comics since I was a little kid. I grew up in a DC household. My dad had like bins and bins and bins of old DC comics, especially like very heavily Batman, Superman comics. But yeah, I've just been in it since I was a little kid. My brother made me kind of get into it even more so because after he got older and started collecting Batman action figures and stuff, then, you know, it was kind of one of those, even though I'm older than him, it was like, well, I want to do what my brother's doing.
Yeah.
And then next thing you know, like, now here I am, hardcore comic book fan, you know,
Yeah.
so.
What about you, Graham?
I kind of started two ways.
Okay.
The first time, I think I was 10 or 11, and I was just happened to be in a Kroger, and there were the little racks that spun around. And
Spinner
you could,
racks.
you know, pick whatever you wanted. And
Yeah.
I saw a Spider-Man comic I thought looked cool, and asked my dad to get it for me. And he did. And I actually loved the art, loved reading it, but hated it because I didn't know what the story was. It was this, you know, just random occurrence, random comment, didn't know anything about it. And I put it down until I was 12 or 13. When we were actually at Universal Studios. We were in the Marvel section, and I went in, I was looking for a superhero, and we talked to the guy selling them and ended up being sold the Daredevil Born Again.
Okay.
Fell in love with it, and thus began the obsession I have with comics.
Great. Me personally, I think my first real exposure to anything comic book related was the Spider-Man animated series, the 90s series. That spun into watching, you know, the Batman series and the X-Men. And then one day I was in a farmer's market with my dad, and there was a stand in there that sold comics, and I saw, you know, Wolverine on a book and picked it up, and that was my first comic purchase, and then kind of just bought random things here and there along the way. But back in, I think, 2009 is when I started my hardcore collecting, and ever since then I have a collection that boasts, you know, $11,000 now, so it's kind of a habit and an addiction. So now that we know where you guys got started with comics, let's start with favorite characters.
Oh man.
Obviously you and your Daredevil.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm also a DC fan. I am. I absolutely love.
As you wear this Marvel shirt.
As I wear the Marvel shirt.
That's okay.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was fitting. It's Civil War, so you know
Yeah.
that's the movie that's coming out soon. I heard nothing but good reviews for that, which, you know, I know you said you didn't care for
Yeah.
the Batman
Batman,
vs Superman, so
yeah.
hopefully this will make up for it. But no, Daredevil was definitely my favorite superhero of all time. But as far as DC goes, I'm actually a huge Shazam fan.
Shazam.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
So.
Well, yeah. Well, my favorite, obviously, if anybody that knows me knows Batman hardcore, which I don't know how I'm here today without absolutely no piece of Batman on me. I guess because I'm trying to rep Ty Dillinger, but that's wrestling. So, but no, Batman is like it. Like that's my number one absolute favorite character, especially from DC world. Second favorite would probably be Constantine. I love Constantine. And then I guess anything from that, Sandman, but that's not really, you know, it's separate from all of that. And then if I picked a Marvel character, one of my absolute favorite Marvel characters is Elektra. So it's kind of funny that you're a huge Daredevil fan, but I love Elektra like, to the core. I have so many like Elektra comic books. It's probably one of the only Marvel comics that I will like dedicate and buy. So.
Yeah, me personally, I don't know if you could tell from my shoes or my socks or the hoodie I was wearing today, but Spider-Man is my guy.
Never would have guessed it.
You could walk into my apartment. I think I've counted the different incarnations of Spider-Man action figures or things on the wall. I think there's 40 is the going total right now. But I've just always, kind of recognized myself in Spider-Man and Peter Parker. But I also love, 90s X-Men, pretty much anything in the Marvel lineup. Comes to DC, I'm not as versed. I'll give DC its due. But Harley Quinn is a favorite that comes from watching the animated series as a kid. Poison Ivy is a favorite. I can't really think of many other DC characters that I've fallen in love
DC
with.
girls. Batgirl's phenomenal.
Yeah,
Batgirl and
recently has been great,
Batwoman.
yeah.
Batwoman's even like more so. Like Batgirl's phenomenal, but like Batwoman, because there's so much more emotional history and baggage behind her as a character. Batwoman is amazing.
Yeah, but stemming away from superhero comics, I also love Calvin and Hobbes, and classic Peanuts from the comic strips in the newspaper growing up.
Absolutely.
My grandfather would make sure the Sunday paper was sitting on the chair when I would get there Monday morning from school. So it was,
I think the only
comics from everywhere.
newspaper comic that I ever read was like religiously was Marmaduke.
Marmaduke's a good one.
And I don't know why I was so obsessed with this huge dog, but I just really loved the whole big dog tearing everything up on accident kind of thing.
See, I think newspaper comics bring a different element of comics. You get, for lack of a full story in 4 or 5 panels, and I think there's something to be said for that. I think Garfield comics were always great.
Oh, I didn't like Garfield.
Really?
I did not like Garfield.
I don't know.
But I also don't like cats.
Okay.
So it was just one of those like, fat cat eating all the lasagna that I could be eating right now. Like, how dare you?
But like, you could also look at like Calvin and Hobbes. They told entire stories in one panel, And I'm such a Calvin and Hobbes fan. I have a stuffed tiger that sits next to my bed named
Absolutely.
Hobbes. So yeah. So now that we hit favorite characters, what about least favorite characters?
Oh man.
I know there's a lot of characters that I despise,
Such as?
such as Batman.
Wow. Wow.
I
Wow, I don't even think I can be here anymore.
Let me.
My heart. Ow.
I gotta ask, just why do you dislike him?
Because I feel like almost every Batman story is the same thing over and over again.
Oh man,
Oh, okay.
you've got to be introduced.
might-
to some
I might
Batman.
be-
I think that's just because you probably are only getting exposed to Batman in the movies. And you're
No,
not
that's not so much. I mean,
I will say that
I
they
haven't-
play around with a lot of the same villains over and over again. And in
Yeah.
that respect, you kind of get to a point where you're like, oh man, I want something really new to come and strike me. For
But they
me
do that in the
personally,
comics.
Court of Owls was it. That
yeah,
was
I've heard.
my way.
I've heard that's
and
one
that's
I
my
should pick
favorite
up.
villain. You definitely gotta kind of just get the good. I mean, and I love Batman. I've gotten to a point where like I could pick up anything Batman and read it now. But I will agree that there are some comics that they're done by a different author, they're done by a different illustrator. It's hard to get into. Daredevil's a great example. We were talking
Yeah.
about that. Not the newest Daredevil, but there was a point where he was in San Francisco. I read 3 pages into that and threw the book at the wall. I hated it. And it's so hard to say that. We're talking about least favorites. I mean, that was it for me. They ruined it.
Well, I've done the same with Spider-Man. Spider-Man got so stale for a while that I just, it wasn't at the top of my stack to read it. And I think that happens a lot with these mainstay characters. They get kind of in a rut,
Yeah.
and it becomes the same thing over and over again.
And see, but like I feel that way about a lot of Marvel characters, though.
I
Like,
could see that.
where I'm like, okay, what is the point of this character? Why should I care? It's just the same thing over and over again. Or there's just their very existence is just like Ant-Man. Why should I care
don't
about
knock
Ant-Man?
Ant-Man.
What is the point of Ant-Man?
Here's the thing, though. I think that for saying who's your least favorite character is really hard because what it sounds like isn't that it's who's your least favorite character. It's, what's the best comic? What's the best comic line? You obviously know really well what the best Spider-Man to read is.
Yeah.
Batman and Elektra. It comes down to really what wasn't written well, what wasn't illustrated well, what pulled you out of the comics and made you hate something because of a fault.
So I think that gets into our next talking point of favorite and least favorite creators. So we can talk about
Frank
creators that.
Miller and well, are we talking creators or writers, or like
I think creators goes under the writers and illustrators and
like our absolute favorite people, period, that
Yeah.
has had any hand on comics,
man.
would be Frank Miller and
Yeah.
Scott Snyder. Like, just
Yeah.
hands down. Those two are just absolutely amazing, especially in the DC world. I know Frank Miller's done some stuff for Marvel too, but like in the DC world,
Frank Miller
Oh, yeah.
basically made Daredevil Daredevil.
Yeah. I
I
mean-
love Frank Miller, but I will actually say one of my favorite right now is Brian Wood.
Okay.
I started with the Northlander series, fell in love with it, started getting into a little bit of the Massive, really
Okay.
good, and lately I've just been absolutely hooked to DMZ. Just sucked into it, and I highly recommend it. But Brian Wood's one, Brubaker.
Okay. Yeah.
Brubaker's good. Yeah, I like
Some
Brubaker.
names that go without.
I mean, he's
Yeah.
of course
mentioned, yeah.
associated to Daredevil.
But
for
even
me, so.
like, because I also very much love Neil Gaiman.
Yeah.
Like anything, I mean, anything he puts out, like I'll sit up and wait. Like he's doing the Sandman Overture. You
Yeah.
know, and I love the Sandman series, period, as it is. Like the, aside from anything in, Batman Elektra, if I had to pick a favorite series, I actually would pick Sandman over anything Batman, just because I love it that much. So, and Overture, it takes him like 3 months before each one
Well,
comes out.
I think Sandman becomes a passion project.
Yeah.
It's one of
totally.
those things that heart and soul is poured into. When Batman, it's like the
Those
face of
are
DC.
out every week, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like you've got, I think, at least 5 Batman books going currently. I don't know. DC's
Well,
done so much lately with.
There's
There is
so
a
many
lot.
different
canceling
stories. I mean,
titles and-
they are all interconnected in some kind of way, But yeah, for the most part, like you've got a different story going off in different directions.
Yeah, and it's always weird with those mainstay characters when they get thrown into 3 different stories at one time.
yeah.
And you're trying to read everything that character's in, and then you're like, what's actually going on, because you can't figure out where they're really
But
at.
that was, I think, the hardest thing for Marvel, and I think that's why, like Daredevil, I love. Spider-Man, I love. But I think, in the X-Men, I love. But I found it really hard to get back into Marvel
Yeah.
after going to DC for so long and still being a huge fan of DC. Is because DC, at least, there's points where they'll start back over again, and you can really follow.
Yeah.
Marvel, I really struggle to find a starting point.
Well,
Even when you do, it's like, oh, we're starting now. There's still so much history to a lot of their characters that, like, I don't know.
Because like DC will hit the reset button after a while. I
you
mean,
could
even
you could kind of look at Marvel's Secret War event as a restart.
yeah, because I
kind of
mean
collided
that
everything
did pull me
and-
back into
and,
Marvel
yeah.
a little bit, because then when I started picking up Secret Wars, I was like, oh, this is actually really good.
Yeah.
Now there's some of them that like I quit reading after a while. Like the little
Yeah.
side stories and stuff that I quit reading because I was like, all right, now I remember why I don't care about this character, and so I stopped buying them. But
Yeah.
the main stories still follow, and there's still some little side characters that I got back into, like Wolverine. I love Wolverine. I forgot how much I love Wolverine until Secret Wars.
Marvel does a good job too. I think the thing about them is, and they've done it with TV shows. I mean, you talked about Spider-Man. They're very good with their animated, television shows or movies.
Yeah.
They are really, really good, and you can follow them in that sense. But talking strictly comic book, Marvel does become very tricky when navigating where to begin with their superheroes. That can be said even with Daredevil.
I
so.
think you could look at that as comics, though, especially superhero comics. These characters that have been around, some of them since the 30s. It's completely different from when they debuted to now. That everything kind of gets lost along the way. And if you didn't start early on, or you haven't been reading them for 10 years, it can get kind of intimidating.
Yeah, especially like when you read some of the newer ones and they make references to stuff that was like 20 years
I
ago.
used to
Yeah.
like it when they put the box at the bottom, reference here.
Yeah.
They still do that.
yeah,
in
they
some
do.
Marvel books.
Some
yeah.
some do
okay.
that. Some still do that.
But
you
I
know.
notice a lot of stuff that I'm reading now is characters that have only been around for a year or two,
Yeah.
or things that are fresh. But
Then you just have to worry about. I mean, like I said, I read a lot of the independents now.
yeah,
Those are really
independents
good.
have blown
but
up
you
over
do
the
have
last
to,
4
to
years
worry
or so.
about losing that weight that we talked about of how big a deal some of those old characters that we love
Mm-hmm.
are. With these new characters in, they don't have that as much.
Yeah.
And that actually kind of draws into my problem with some comics where you get very attached, and then there's really nothing. Shazam's a great example of that, where he goes back and forth all the time, where they'll throw him in, you'll
He'll be
love him,
relevant
and
for a
then
minute, and then
where's he go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he's back, and then disappears again.
Because even like they were doing a recent story with him for a while,
Yep.
you know, where he was a prevalent character in the story, and then he just disappeared.
Yeah. They
Like-
actually had his very own trade for the New 52.
Yeah.
Shazam. It was great, and then it was like, all right, I'm ready for the second volume.
And they
don't have any.
DC is so bad about ending a story because it's like, you know, when you do have those little character spin-offs like that where they do give them their own trade like that, and then it's like it hits the end and it leaves you at a point where you're just like, okay, so there's gonna be more soon. So you sit back and you wait, and then you're like, wait, there's not, you know, because you
Yeah.
didn't end that one in a way where I'm like, okay, that's the end of his story.
I think that that's part of DC's, I don't want to say problem, but one of their downfalls is they like to write stories that go, you know, could go 10 issues and whatnot. And instead of making an event, like if Marvel were to do a story that long, I think Marvel typically, I think they have a rule that a story can't go over 5 issues. I don't know if that's official, but I've heard that before.
Well, I mean, Secret Wars definitely.
But Secret Wars was an event. When it
Yeah.
falls into the event, it becomes, you know, a whole different ballgame. But
I will
think
say that's true though about DC. I actually really got into Superman and Wonder Woman.
okay.
yes,
And
those were
then
so good.
Volume 2 or Trade 2 came around, and it was like, it didn't even pick up where the last one left off. I was so confused reading it.
Yeah.
Because what happened is
I know
between
they got like a new writer, or they switched.
well, yeah, they got a new writer, but the story actually ended up continuing in for a little bit. I think it was actually, I don't remember if it was in the Wonder Woman comics, that they actually concluded the story in the Wonder Woman comics, but they didn't conclude the story in the actual Superman Wonder
So
Woman
that's the
comic.
other thing is like when
So
you
it's
have when you have 2 characters who are sharing a title and then they also have their own individual titles that they're pulling the story into, and you don't really get that full experience
That,
when
and then you have some that are better than others. Like Superman Unchained was phenomenal.
Yeah, Superman
but then
Unchained
you have
was-
Action Comics, which everybody I
hate-
talked to was like, don't read it.
I hate
Just
Action
don't
Comics.
even start.
I
Like,
hate Action Comics.
Oh man.
It was great. Like Action Comics was great before New 52. I mean, it's the
Okay.
same thing with Constantine. Constantine was great before New 52, and
I
then
heard
New 52 happened.
screwed up a lot.
You know,
Yeah.
I actually like New 52 a
No,
lot. I mean,
overall,
there's definitely a lot they messed up.
Yeah, overall I like New 52, but there's just some titles that I held very near and dear to my heart
Yeah.
that they kind of screwed
New
up.
52 is a very clean reboot, I think is another
No,
good
they
point.
did completely reboot.
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that was
yeah.
just like, all right, that is the end of that era. We're hitting restart and we're starting over.
And they're doing it again with Rebirth.
Yeah, now I'm back again going, okay, where's the New 52 end so that I can try to make sense of where to start with the new stuff, so.
Yeah, I think, back to what we're currently reading, I think Spider-Gwen has been a book that is kind of at the top of my list. I read anything with Miles Morales in it. A lot of Spider-Man stuff, but not the canon Spider-Man title, surprisingly.
See, I like Spider-Girl, and I like her, of course, I showed you the comics before she was Spider-Girl.
Yeah.
That was one of the first I started off with, but I've actually heard a lot of good things about Spider-Gwen, and the amount of cosplay I've seen at cons and stuff, I
It's-
mean, she's really blown
It's
up.
interesting because even though there's not the Ultimate Universe and the 616 universe anymore, she's kind of off in her own universe. It's strange because Marvel was supposed to be, you know, tying all these things together, but she's kind of off in her own thing. Right now they're actually doing a Spider-Woman women event, which is going to span, I think, about 10 issues over Spider-Woman, Silk, Spider-Gwen, and then there's an Alpha and an Omega book, which I'm looking forward to. I believe that started a couple weeks ago.
You start listing this, it's like, oh man, I just know this is going to get
It's
complicated
like,
really
oh my
quick.
gosh,
But
there's so many of them.
Where do
But-
I start?
It's like trying to keep up with like how many Deadpools there are. You
But
know?
I think, I mean, you made a point too, and I think this is important, is where, yes, DC does have their standalone superheroes, but then when they actually all come together, it's pretty simple to follow. It's Justice League or
Yeah.
Justice League America. I mean, it's pretty easy. It's like, okay, I can read my favorite hero here and here. Marvel
essentially
just
the
bleeds
point.
everywhere
Yeah.
into everything, and it's like,
well-
I've picked up stuff about Daredevil and, you know, other comics just to read more Daredevil. That
well, I think recently they've done a lot of events. Marvel does a main event every year, and then they do like their mini events, which like Spider-Women, or like I remember there was a a Punisher, Spider-Man, Daredevil story that I needed to pick up one issue of each of the series, but other than that, it was, you know, straightforward and through.
But what DC does is, I mean, because like you have because with the individual characters, you know, they may be having their own story going on, and then when you pick up like stuff like Justice League and stuff like that, they have like a major story that's going on and along.
Well, that was another thing I was gonna say. Like, you can pick up Deadpool, and Deadpool is doing his Deadpool stuff in his main book, but then he's also a part of the Secret Avengers now.
I mean, he's a part of everything. I mean,
Yeah,
I was
that
reading a
dude's a part of
Wolverine comic
everything.
recently,
And
he's
he
just
just
walking
shows
in the
up.
back.
Yeah, but I think Deadpool's one of those characters that can get away with it because he knows he's in a comic, he knows he breaks the fourth wall. He's just one of those guys that can show up wherever. But I think when you have characters like Captain America, who has his own book, and then he's on the Avengers, and then he's in the Secret Avengers, it kind of, you can read all three and it'll make sense, but I think you could also read just one book and it also makes sense.
I mean, DC, you can do that in DC
Yeah.
too. You could read just Justice League and, you know, be
Yeah.
fine. You could read just Wonder Woman and be fine. Like, you don't necessarily need all that. Like, it's just that when they do the little mini series, like the Superman Wonder Woman one, you know, and then it just, like, you go from the first trade to the second trade, there might be
And
that
they
slight
started
Yeah.
over again too. I mean, that was the thing that I really admired about them is they knew it was a separate universe.
Yeah.
They started with Wonder Woman and Superman dating, and Superman has never met Zod, and that's the first enemy they face. And it's like, oh, I know Zod. You pick up any superhero, Superman, and it's like, okay, you get to know Zod, but it's like they
Yeah.
started back with Superman and Wonder Woman. It was like, okay, I know confidently if I get into this, I don't have to worry about following it anywhere else because it's its own universe. I can read this trade and be done when it's done.
Yeah.
So let me get you guys' opinions on independent books. So we're talking not necessarily superheroes, but anything from something other than Marvel and DC.
I mean,
Walking
Walking Dead does not count. I mean, well, really, I don't even know that I can say any of mine count, because the only two that I obsess with outside of DC is the Sandman series.
Okay.
And so the Overture stuff, but I mean, that's like, a couple months in between each one before, I get excited again and I'm like, yay, it's finally out. And then I read it and then I'm sad because I have to wait another couple months. But, and then I also read Saga.
Okay, Saga is a great book.
Yeah, Saga is amazing. Very much love those stories. So
I've been reading a lot of Brian K. Vaughan's Paper Girls. That's one of those books that comes out. It's one of those books I have to buy.
Yeah.
It's so good.
I haven't actually read it, but I've heard a lot of good things about it.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's one of those books. If you like Saga and you like the way Vaughn writes, then you'll love it. I think another independent book that I admire is Sex Criminals,
Yes.
which it's kind of hard to explain that one to the viewers at home if they haven't read it already.
If you're a
But
kid, don't read that. Don't start that one.
but
Oh man.
I think that's another great independent book.
That one was an interesting read for me because I heard it was good, so I got it off of a recommendation, and I read it and was so confused. And it wasn't till the end of the trade that I was like, "This makes sense. I want more.
Yeah.
This is funny."
It's so off the wall though.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting it. The independents are really getting good. You know, I say anything by Brian Wood. I'm really digging.
I read
Variant was
Trees.
really good. I started getting into like the Eternal Warrior. That was really cool.
Okay. I don't think I've picked up many of their titles.
There is.
I don't even think I've ever
man,
heard of
there's
that
so
one.
many independents that are good, and I wish I
There
could.
are a lot because
couldn't
like
say
I also
them all.
I very much love anything by Warren Ellis. So
Okay,
like I
yeah.
read Trees, which is so good. It's kind of weird at first getting into it because you're like, I'm not sure what this is supposed to be about. But it's Warren Ellis, so like if you've ever read anything by Warren Ellis, you kind of expect to not understand what's
Yeah.
happening for a little bit. But that's actually a really good story.
I know another one that I'm reading is The Wicked and the Divine. That's written by Kieran Gillen and art by Jamie McKelvey. They did the last run of Young Avengers for Marvel, but they came over. They do a lot of work together. They also worked on Phonogram, which went into a third series. But their writing and their art bounce off each other really well. And I think Wicked and the Divine has also been optioned for TV. which is crazy to hear independent stuff getting optioned for television. But
It's oh man.
Independents are getting a lot more attention.
There. I will say this without saying any names. I know I talked to one author already, and because I wanted to do a fan film just of his work, and I was told that Warner Brothers had picked it up, and I was like, whoa, I can't even do a fan film. Like, I don't even know how many legal things are involved, but it's an independent, and I'm like, wow. Two more just because I have to say these are really good. Birthright.
Okay.
Surprised me, really good. Been following that, and then if you go back to older independents, another one. Don't read kids, but Cave Woman was actually really cool.
I've read Cave Woman. Yeah,
Cave Woman was really well done.
Yeah. Yeah,
right.
that's definitely not a kid's one.
No, don't read that.
No, not a kid's one, but
All
it is
right.
really good.
Well, I think we're hitting time. So on that note, it looks like we've come to yet another conclusion of another episode of Defiant Giant Live. Be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments below and make sure that you click that little subscribe button so you don't miss any future DG Live episodes. Also, to keep up with everything Defiant Giant, don't forget to follow us on all of our social media channels, which you can find over on our website, thebigdg.com. For my guests, Graham and Mila, I'm Steven, and for everyone here at Defiant Giant, we'll see you next time. Thanks.